Good morning, and thank you for joining us for another B2B Sales and Marketing Friday Talks, what we run every second Friday and share insights, best practices, and anecdotes from technology companies. And this time, we decided to discuss a little bit about the PR. And PR has been for a very long time with us, like marketeers and many companies were leveraging PR to reach out the uh, influencers, reporters, and media to share their stories. And same time, many companies also like look at PR as something very static, very old-fashioned. And nowadays, especially when everything moves to the digital space, we are running digital events, we are sharing content digitally, and many other things. So there is a big question of how then PR can be useful, and especially in B2B space. And so for that, we have invited Mike Maynard, the managing director of the Napier Partnership Limited, a marketing and PR agency for the tech companies out of the UK. So welcome, Mike.
Welcome.
Thanks very much for having me on Friday Talks, Andreas.
Yeah, big pleasure to have you here, Mike. And I'm looking forward to learn from you how to really leverage PR nowadays in the digital world and make it really work for driving business and driving leads and everything what modern marketing is looking for. And I think the first what I would like to start with is please help us to understand what do we understand by PR nowadays? Where actually we can draw the line between the PR and marketing, if at all?
Yeah, I mean that's a really hard question to answer in some ways, because PR is obviously managing the relationship with your public, so managing the relationship with the audience. That's so incredibly broad. It's almost unhelpful as a definition. But I think today, what people really understand as PR is it's much more about how you can interact with your audience, typically through intermediaries. So, generally speaking, two of the most commonly cited areas of PR, certainly in B2B tech, would be media relations. So getting content published in magazines and other publications, and analyst relations. So working with analysts to get them to cover you. So it's about working with those influencers. I mean, I think today, we also see a lot of people looking at digital influencers as part of their PR campaign, and maybe even some of their own social media channels. So the own social media channels become part of PR. And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, there are companies who are looking at public affairs, so working with governments to influence governments, and that would also fall within PR. So the answer is it's incredibly broad. And where do we draw the line? To some extent, that answer is, well, wherever you want to. It doesn't really matter. I think what's important is getting the right mix of activities rather than being too specific about which department does what.
Yeah. I agree. However, the thing is that it has been always like a big question, like, shall we use the PR or not, and where exactly the PR should be placed in the marketing mix, especially nowadays in this digital era. Again, like considering that there are like many companies who already owns like a channel, like in the LinkedIn or elsewhere. They even build communities. So the question is whether they need in general also go outside of these channels what they have.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think the best way to look at PR is thinking about a customer journey, or even if you want to simplify it, the sales funnel. And if you think about what you're doing with PR, you're trying to put people into that customer journey right at the start. So PR is typically very much top of the funnel stuff. So people talk about awareness, making people aware of your company, and also perception, how people see the company. And I agree, today we see a lot of digital marketing, but that's focused at the end of the customer journey. That's all about conversion. You hear about performance marketing. And in reality, that's a completely different thing, because that can suck people out the end of the journey and turn them into customers. But if you're not filling the funnel or moving people into the start of the journey, it's going to get harder and harder. You're going to exhaust that flow of people who know and are aware of your company. So, to think about something really simple, like maybe buying a mattress for a bed, so on a consumer concept. Yes, you could just run Google Ads. But if nobody's aware of your brand and nobody sees you as being a good brand, then really you're going to compete on price, and that's it. You're a commodity. Whereas if you're doing PR, and we've seen this a lot with brands like Casper, who've come in with very trendy, sort of online companies. They've used a lot of PR and also advertising and other channels, but a lot of PR to really promote the fact they're doing something special. And then that means when they get down to the bottom of the funnel, the performance marketing and getting people to actually become customers, they can then charge a premium. They can make a profit. And I think that's really important to look at the balance between, the bottom of the funnel converting people to customers, which absolutely is super important. But also making sure that people starting that customer journey, have awareness and also have a perception that your product is a good product. It's worth paying perhaps a slight premium for.
Yeah, I think you touched very important topic, like a buyer journey as a concept of executing a marketing or whatever you do, right? And what we see that there is still lack of this mindset in many companies. So they kind of look at some fragmented activities very often and don't see like the full funnel and where PR can play a very important role, because as you said, so if there is no understanding of the problem or awareness of something, why somebody should care and look for your product or think of buying this product or listening to you about this product and things like that. And probably PR is one of the early steps in this journey, and that can help to bring the audience into right level of the awareness. And in this context, I would like to ask you, like, what kind of, in terms of the tactical execution, what type of tactics and formats of information you see most appropriate again nowadays, considering that there is both offline and online type of world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, we could look at different areas. So analyst relations, for example, is typically driven by briefing of analysts. And so that is about, giving analysts access to, influential people, knowledgeable people within your organization, that then makes the analysts, really understand your business. That's different from what I think, most people think about when they think about PR, which is media relations, which is how do I get coverage in the press or maybe through social media influencers. And that's really about content. And in fact, when we talk about campaigns with clients, we don't tend to talk a lot about channels at the start. We tend to talk more about content creation. So what is the content that's going to make a difference to your audience? And then content distribution. How are you going to get that in front of the audience? And PR is obviously a key part of content distribution. You can't run a great PR campaign without great content, particularly in B2B.
Yeah, I agree. However, the question is, so do I understand right, is that you basically use the customer in-house expertise, so like experts and some specialists to create the content. That basically what PR helps to put them in front of the audience, right? To make them visible to the audience, and then through that gain some attention and trust and interest.
Yeah,
Would
exactly.
Be a right assumption.
Exactly. And it's not just the client creating the content. So without doubt, in B2B, there is some very technical content that requires, real experts. And we have clients, where they have world experts in their technology. And clearly we can't replicate that in an agency. But there's a lot of work around, positioning companies and talking about, for example, trends and where they see the industry going. And that is very much something that we might take the majority of the project on, and perhaps only have a review process with the client. And then, of course, and particularly in B2B, this is really important. to get endorsement through case studies. So your customers talking about how they've used our clients' products, that is super important. I think, somebody said to me once, they said, the one thing you can guarantee is that everyone wants to know what people are doing if they're doing the same job in different companies. So, if you're, for example, responsible for buying, silicon chips, you're an engineer, you're designing in silicon chips, you really want to know what other engineers are doing. The same thing if you're in IT, you really want to know, when you're buying, say, network equipment, you want to know what other network engineers and other organizations are doing, what they're seeing. So nothing, I think, can really beat, a great case study showing how you've actually come in and helped a company that's similar to the customers you want to try and win.
Yeah. I think this quality of the content, it becomes crucially important nowadays, because you see that there are so much content available whenever you go, like would it be a LinkedIn or just Google or anything else. So there are plenty of articles, white papers, analyst reports, and whatever else on very different topics. You can really find a lot of content, but what makes the difference is probably the depth and the quality of this content, and that is how companies can stand out from all this noise what is currently created. How you ensure that the content what really has been produced is something what makes a lot of relevance and difference for the audience?
So that's a great question, and we've basically built an agency around understanding the audience. So if we look at a lot of agencies will specialize in certain tactics. So you might have a social agency, or you might have a performance marketing agency doing programmatic and pay-per-click. But what we've chosen to do as an agency is we've chosen to focus on a particular audience, which is frankly engineers. And so we've built a really deep understanding of what engineers want, what adds value to them. And because of that, we can actually go and advise our clients. So I think, the simple answer is you've got to understand the audience. And I wouldn't say, we're experts in every audience. So we work very closely with our clients. And quite often we're not talking to the marketing team about what their audience wants. We're talking to salespeople, because salespeople are obviously, the ones that interact on a more day-to-day basis. So I think it's about, getting every point of reference you can, and then trying to understand that audience. We even have a group of electronics design engineers that we can go out and ask questions for clients, and genuinely get, feedback from real engineers. So you really do have to dig that deep to be able to understand what makes a difference and what doesn't. From
our experience, what has been working really well is also the customer interviews. You just ask your client, like, hey, give us a couple of customers, or at least like several of them, and we usually just talk to them for a little, and that is so insightful and so helpful for you to understand their thought process, terminology, what they use, actually challenges what they are facing, and the questions what they are looking answers for. And that's a great tool for creating a content, actually. But
I mean, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I think I think it's talking to the people who are going to ultimately consume the content is the most important thing. Absolutely.
Mike, I wanted to ask you: is every technology company a good fit with PR as marketing tool? Because sometimes things are really specific, really technical, and in terms of public relations, there's no public, because there are maybe 200, maybe 500 potential customers, and buyers are extremely technical. In such cases, is PR still a good tool to use?
So that's a great question. I mean, I think maybe there's someone out there where PR doesn't work, but we've worked with a wide range of clients you look at and say, yeah, maybe PR is not the right thing. So one example is in the airport sector, where we have a client who makes baggage handling systems. They maybe have one major new customer a year, because the only way you can become a customer is to either build an airport or build an airport terminal, really. That's the only time that you're going to put baggage handling or do a major refurbishment. So they've got no problem finding out who their potential customers are, because it's very public when airports are being built or when they're being upgraded. But what we find with them, for example, is that PR is incredibly effective, because actually the process, if you think about building an airport or even building a terminal, I think the process from, initially starting the project to actually opening the terminal for Munich Terminal 2 was something like 20 years. So how are you going to keep those people engaged? And more to the point, how are you going to reach people who are, influential in the decision, but not those technical decision makers? An example I give is when I used to work as an engineer, so I was the audience that we target now. And, the last thing you wanted to do was say, I want to use this supplier in our next product. You go talk to your boss, you say, I want to use this supplier, and the boss says, who are they? I mean, that it almost immediately kills it. Whereas, if your boss, who may not be directly involved in what you're doing, says, oh yeah, I know about them, they're quite good, I've heard this or I've heard that, immediately it's much easier for you to then get approval and get that through. And I think that's the same, if you look at and go to bigger and bigger purchases, if you have to go to the board and get board approval, if the CEO's heard of the product and feels familiar and feels it's successful, so much easier to get that client approved and make basically, the audience come to you and say, yes, we want to buy.
Yeah, and I think that relates actually to most of these awareness type of activities, because it's not always like directly measurable. And as soon as this is like a very long-term projects with very long sales cycle, you cannot immediately see, hey, there is a click, there is a purchase, right? And I think that also very important to understand that the impact what you are creating by PR or other activities is to make people trust you, to make people remember you, to make people actually think of you when they are about to, decide whom they will involve to one or another project. And that's a long process of creating this type of trust, right? And I think PR is probably one of these vehicles that can help you.
I think trust is one of the great benefits of PR that is very hard to get from other channels. And we've seen, there's some great examples of where companies have lost trust very quickly. It's very hard to build up. It's very easy to lose. I mean, I think, a great example was BP, which is obviously a British company we're all quite proud of. They had a CEO that the media particularly loved. And he left. They had a new CEO. He wasn't keen on interacting with the media. And then we had the Deepwater Horizon disaster. And immediately BP was in the gun sights of the media. And, to some extent, they perhaps didn't get an entirely fair press over what happened and who was responsible. But it was because they hadn't built that trust. And they'd lost the trust to some extent with the audience in the UK, so basically the UK public, but particularly they'd lost that trust with journalists. And I think you can look at other examples like that where companies haven't built trust, and when things go wrong, you've got nothing to go with. You're very, very vulnerable. Whereas if you spend time, you build trust, you build confidence. I'm not saying that BP would ever have got away with people saying, oh, that's unlucky, it's unfortunate, but we won't blame them. But I think it could have been a lot less painful for them. And the same could be with companies in all sorts of things, and particularly in technology. We have an issue that technical products are very difficult to develop. And the reality is everybody has delays in product launches. So they'll announce a product, then maybe there's some bugs, maybe there's some problems, maybe the product doesn't get out. If you've built that trust, you've built a reputation, you're very open, you're honest, you're communicating, then your customers will be much more willing to work with you than if there's no trust there, where they might immediately just go, right, we're never using you again because you're delayed. And we've seen clients who have had issues with products, they've worked with customers, and by having a level of trust that's built partly through sales, partly through, the website, but also partly through PR, they've been able to recover from problems. And to think, as a business or as an organization, you're never going to have problems, you're crazy. There's always going to be problems. So trust is incredibly valuable when you need it, but very, very hard to measure when you don't need it.
That's very true. And, it's On what I would like to ask you is that there are companies like you mentioned, BP or similar size companies, and obviously PR for them means completely different than for maybe niche company, small tech company who is like, I don't know, working with the hundreds of potential clients globally. So how do you see these channels have evolved since like pandemic and in general this shift to the digital? So because many customers we are working with today bet on digital very much, which is obviously a good thing and right thing to do. But same time, what we have noticed is that there are still audiences which are half digital or almost not digital at all. And so how do you see these channels from the PR standpoint evolving? And what is your experience in leveraging one or another, or how to find the right channel to reach out the audience, which is not so broad, let's say?
That's such an interesting question. I think, one thing I'd say is that as an agency, we've never really differentiated between what you might call traditional PR and digital PR. We've always thought of it as PR. But you're right, audiences are very different, and they can have different responses to different channels. So, for example, the IT sector is very, very driven by social media. And if you look at IT security, that's incredibly driven by Twitter. I mean, a lot of information about vulnerabilities comes out on Twitter first. Whereas if we look at something that you'd think would be fairly similar, so electronics engineering, actually the influence of social media is much, much smaller. And there's lots of good reasons why. But what I'd say is that, you started asking about smaller companies. And I think some smaller companies look at their competitors, they've got very big competitors. And they go, well, how can I compete with a giant, global giant? If I'm only small, I've got a small marketing team, a small budget. My answer is to think about things like SEO. So if you're competing with a big competitor, you're going to really struggle to rank higher than them on Google search. Probably right. I mean, it's probably the right thing for Google to do, is to rank the biggest suppliers. So how are you going to rank highly? You can invest an awful lot of money in SEO, and that might move you onto the front page. It might not. Or what you can do is you can actually, and you could almost think of this in a way like outsourcing your SEO. You can invest in PR, and you can get coverage in online publications. And typically, Google ranks online publications very highly because they tend to be authoritative. They tend to, have good information. They've got journalists making sure the quality is good. So they should rank highly. So if you get a great article in a publication, in an online publication, you can rank above your massive competitors. And so I think, PR can be absolutely an important part of the digital mix, and particularly around organic search. If you search for something and you see a couple of magazine articles, as well as the company's page and things like that, it's suddenly really positive. If you just see the company's page and nothing else, you're perhaps less excited about it. So to me, digital's, really exciting. And we're still talking about early in the customer journey, where you have that influence. But I would say to small companies, just think about what you can do. You've got these publications that, are really focused on SEO because traffic matters to them. And they really understand SEO, and they've got great content. They've got great domain authority. They're in a brilliant position. You can actually use them to get your content out. And if you just think of that as the only benefit you're getting, improving SEO, quite often PR then becomes a no-brainer. And then if you look at all the other benefits you get from PR, then it's clearly a great move.
But can you always create a good story, actually?
So I think you can. So firstly, I think if you look at stories, the story about customers and how they use your product is always interesting. Everyone wants to know what, people in their role, but in another company are doing. So, that's great. I mean, we worked for a long time with a client that does fasteners, which is basically a posh way of saying nuts and bolts. Could we create great stories? Absolutely. We had some awesome stories there. I think, they're all about applications typically. They had some technology actually that was kind of cool in terms of how they put their fasteners into sheet metal. So we could talk a little about technology there. You can talk about the technology behind the actual fasteners themselves. That's a lot of metallurgy and science there. I think if you can do it for nuts and bolts, you can pretty much do it with anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I also would. I'm wondering, like, again, from our experience and mid-sized companies with mid-sized companies and small companies, especially, but it's the same actually applies to the big companies. When it comes to the investment, everyone looks for the ROI and everyone looks for, hey, whether it will drive sales for us. So the question is, can PR really generate sales leads? Do you have any experience with that? And how do you measure actually that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question, and it's a really tough question. I'm sure you know, Andreas, that the PR industry really struggles with measurement. So there's an organization called AMEC, which is the organization that tries to find out how to measure the effectiveness of PR. And in the last few years, they changed the way they measured it, so they clearly got it wrong. I think it's very hard to measure in general. And the reason is that it's not something that has an immediate impact. It has an impact over time. So the brutal truth is, if you get one article in a publication, is that really going to change the way people perceive you and make people aware of you? Probably not if you're a small client. It's consistency over a period. It's the same with advertising. Advertising, obviously, there's been lots of studies that show seeing one ad has very little impact. Seeing that same ad multiple times actually has a lot more impact. So PR is about consistency over a period of time, and that's why it becomes very difficult to measure. As an ex-engineer, I'd say, you're trying to measure a system with a delay in it. It's really hard to do. Having said that, can you generate sales leads? You can, but generally speaking, PR isn't particularly effective at doing that, because that's not really what the mode that people are in when they're, it's probably not what it's designed for. But we've run campaigns. So, for example, we've got a client with an amazing new product that detects leaks in pneumatic systems. So you've got air leaks in pneumatic systems, and this Fluke product, you point it at the system and it shows you on the screen where the leak is, even though you can't see it. It's incredible. And that actually is quite an interesting product, because we've done some PR to drive lead generation on that. And the reason is it's a new technology. It was invented or pioneered by Fluke. They were the first people with the product. And so we've produced ebooks, and we're actually have created PR around ebooks, and we're getting signups. So we're getting leads from the PR. Yes. But I would absolutely say that's the exception. It's not the norm. I think you've got to think about this customer journey. We keep coming back to it. And what you need to be doing with PR is pushing people in at the start, so you can then, at the end of the journey, convert them into customers. If you don't have people coming into that journey and flowing through, at some point your performance marketing will stop working, your Google ads, because people won't search for you. They won't search for the keywords.
That's very true. I think one of the PR roles, and we are repeating it, is basically creating demand, right? It's not about generating leads or capturing leads. It's about creating demand over time. And you mentioned very rightly about the consistency. I think it applies not only to the PR, but to any execution nowadays. You have to be consistent. You have to think long term and do it on the regular basis, so that it's not just a one-time like random activity and then expecting that from that you will generate a lot of the sales or pipeline. But the last question I would like to ask you, as time is running out and we need to wrap up. So if you think of like a mid-size and small tech company, what they can do now to start better leveraging the PR? What would be your recommendation for that?
That's a great question, Andreas. It depends a little bit on the circumstance, but generally speaking, the best thing they can do is to get their customers talking for them, because customer case studies are so compelling. And it's the same with anything. When you've got someone telling you they're great, you kind of don't believe it. When you've got a third person saying, actually, this person is brilliant, you need to work with them, then suddenly you do. So to me, if I was a small or a mid-sized company, I'd look at my customers and I'd try and work out, which ones could create great stories. And if you have a great customer case study, you will get great PR because everybody cares about that. So the journalists know that their audience will read about it. The audience will read about it and be influenced by it. And particularly if you're smaller and you've got big customers, you talk about, benefiting from the brand equity of those big customers. So, if you've got a giant customer saying you as a relatively small supplier are great, that gives you so much credibility. So to me, I think that's what I'd do first. And I've even seen, we have one client we worked with for a while that was pretty small. And in a fairly small market, they were actually, quite successful. And they had a policy of subsidizing customers who gave them case studies. So they'd actually give discounts to people who gave them good case studies. And I'm not saying you need to do that, because if you've got a great product and your customers like it, generally speaking, they'll be okay about talking about it. But, sometimes maybe it's even worth doing that because it can be so powerful to get those testimonials.
Yeah, it's very true, very true. Okay, thank you very much, Mike, for this conversation. I think it was insightful and full of great ideas, what I hope our listeners will benefit from. Just to summarize, I think what you said is that PR is something what you need to put in the context of the buyer journey, and typically it helps in the top of the funnel to create an awareness and trust, and basically drive demand as such, right, for your product or services. Secondly, what I noted that the good idea is to leverage those specialists and competencies what you might potentially have in-house. So like your engineers, maybe somebody who is very passionate about the technology or the product and can share this passion with the analysts or with somebody else. Of course, with help of agency or somebody who can then put it into the proper format and wording and story. And last but not least, I think it's also important to execute it on the consistent and regular manner, so that it's not just a one-time activity like a one article or one ebook or one report, but it's something what you do over and over again, and you engage with your audience and you make them interested in your stories and keep following you and keep engaging with the content what you create. So anything you would still add to this summary, or then that would be pretty much?
Do you know what, Andreas? I couldn't improve on that summary. I thought it was perfect. It was a really good summary, I think, of what we talked about.
Okay. Very good. So thank you again for being with us. And I hope we potentially have another story from you to be shared with our audience. For those who are listening to us or watching us on the LinkedIn, I would encourage you to follow our company profile, ibd-consulting on LinkedIn, or the hashtag FryTalks, which will help you to quickly locate all the information and episodes and all other content related to B2B sales and marketing FryTalks, what we have been producing over the time. And please join us on the YouTube channel, what we just recently created and collected all the episodes from the past, as well as feel free to subscribe to a podcast of Sales and Marketing FryTalks at any podcast platform. As usually, we will come back very shortly with the announcement of the next guest, which will be in a couple of weeks. And we are looking forward to continue our conversation with you guys. So thank you and have a great rest of the Friday and a wonderful weekend.
Bye.